Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Indie Game Movement, the podcast that talks about the marketing and business of indie games. I'm Andrew Pappas. I'm going to be your host today, and we're going to be talking about building better game companies. Now, many game studio leaders aspire to build better companies, but navigating the complexities of vision, focus, and adaptability can pose significant challenges. So in this episode, we're going to explore practical strategies for overcoming these hurdles and achieving clarity and growth in a competitive landscape. From maintaining focus amidst competing priorities to mitigating potential problems, we're going to be sharing actionable insights aimed at empowering developers and studio leaders to build stronger, more resilient companies. So that's what we're going to be talking about right here today on Indie Game Movement. Hey, everybody, and we're back. And today with us, I have Martijn van Zwieten. How's it going, Martijn?
Yeah, good. Thanks for having me.
Yes, of course. Well, I'm really excited to have you here today for a lot of reasons, some of which we discussed earlier before we hit record, and soon enough, all of you will find. But first, before we get into that, I just want to give a brief introduction to Martijn here. And, one is the main one here is he's a business coach and consultant for video games and digital entertainment. And what he does is he's essentially, helping leaders implement frameworks, investment readiness preparation. There's so much more than just those two main things. What are a few other things? Because I feel I'm not doing you any justice by just calling out those two things, because I know there's so much more that you're involved with.
It actually is those two main things, though. So it's really about helping companies implement the right frameworks and the right habits to run their company in a better way, get better results, and really thrive. And everything flows from that. But the main thing is really just the business coaching trajectories. Okay,
awesome. Because like you said, those are and it's good because, again, we'll get into this soon, but a lot of what you do is really a process of simplification to then get to those results, to get those goals and everything else. Excellent.
Exactly.
And on top of that too, he has extensive experience in the game industry, and it ranges everything from marketing, business development, project management. I'm sure there's a lot more that you have experience with too, but all great stuff. Just this is an area you're extremely familiar with, of course. And then just some, achievements and acknowledgments to call out to. He's helped many CEOs and studios achieve recognition, for, let's say, best studios in various countries. I know a lot of different industries within certain countries and stuff have these types of awards and stuff. And a lot of the people you've worked with in the past have received recognition for those types of things. And I think, a large part of it is what they're doing, but having the right guidance can also help them achieve those things too. So that's a big thing. And on top of that too, you've been doing some public speaking too. So what was, I guess, one of the most recent ones or that you can call out just so we can get an idea of where you spoke at and what you talked to?
Yeah, so I've talked at Reboot twice, Reboot Develop in Croatia. And the most recent one is, I think, has been at Nordic Game last year, which was about the role of self-awareness in leadership, and why I think it's the biggest lever that leaders have to really unlock better leadership and better results.
Oh, such a good topic, and such an important one too. Self-awareness is, I think, important from a personal perspective and growth, but it's also, I'm sure, very similar to same concepts that you talk about and implement as well in terms of leadership and everything else. It
Absolutely.
It really does so much there. So I'm interested now in that, but we're not here for that, unfortunately. Maybe I'm sure it will come up to some degree. Are those available publicly at all? Any of those talks that you just mentioned?
They should be on my YouTube channel.
Okay, excellent. And folks, we'll make sure to link those things in the show notes as well, in case you want to learn a little bit more about those topics. But for right now, we're going to get into our discussion. But wait, I'm just kidding. We're actually going to go into the Q Box round first. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the Q Box round, it's just a series of, some random questions I prepared here for Martin here for today. So are you ready, Martijn, for the Q Box round?
Yeah, hit me.
All right. What's one habit you have that has contributed to your success?
Probably just asking why a whole bunch of times in whatever scenario comes up.
I love that one.
In order to really understand what's going on and take the best step forward.
Such a good one. And that goes right back to the whole introspective and aspects of it things too. So see, they're all these things are all going to correlate, folks. Just wait, you'll see. Right. Next is, what's your main approach to tackling problems?
Ooh. I guess I would say the main approach is I tend to look for the first principles that are present in a problem. So what are the smallest parts you can break it down to that are still true, that don't really require any complicated context, and then try to work from there because, usually the simplest parts make for the simplest solution.
I love that too, because I think all of us in one way, shape, or another, we can be our own worst enemy in respect to overcomplicating things, whether we just do it by nature, whether there's emotions involved. And that one right there just is just a really great way to, tackle anything in a way, especially when it gets out of hand and it gets out of proportion or overwhelming for us. So great one there. Thank you for sharing. And last but not least, and the staple here on the show is, what game are you playing now?
Oh, so I'm actually replaying my favorite game of all time right now, which is Shadow of the Colossus. So I played the original one on PlayStation 2, never got around to the remake, so I'm getting into that one right now.
I need to play that remake too. I should probably play the original even. I think I have it somewhere, but it's been a long time. But anyways, such a good one. And glad you're enjoying that for the second time, with a lot more of the quality of life features that we're used to this day and age.
Yes. Yeah. The controls have definitely improved.
Awesome. Well, Martijn, thanks for taking the time to, get to know you a little bit more and such. But now we're going to get to not only know you a little bit more, but also dig into this topic, which, as I shared earlier in the introduction, folks, an important one, and I'm sure something that we're all curious about is, building better game companies. Now, to kick things off, let's just face it, everyone wants to build a better game company, right? I mean, the alternative is not to, and I can't say for certain, but I don't think people are like, I want to build a worse game company, though sometimes this day and age, you might think that might be happening but at any rate, I digress. That said, though, from your perspective, what does that look like for most studios? And how might those visions cause some leaders to struggle to do so?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. And I think actually the interesting part is that I'm actually not sure that everyone wants to build a better game company, not knowingly, not consciously anyway. I think for a lot of people that start a game company, the thing that matters is the game. So they want to build better games, not necessarily a better game company. So the thing I've found is that there's basically two ways of looking at it. One is you start a games company, you make games, and the company part is just what comes with making games. And it's something that, you're not really looking forward to. It's meetings, it's overhead, it's a lot of communication with stakeholders that you don't necessarily want to deal with. And the other way is the people, and I think that's the more sustainable way, is seeing the game company as the entity that will allow you to actually make great games. But I think that second category is actually in the minority.
I love that you say that, and it's really interesting too, because I know just from my own experience, I see that happen all the time when people are making games, and I would say especially for indies, and indies, honestly, it can mean anything, right? Like it's very broad term, even though we generally think of it like bootstrapping and just focus on the passion and everything. There's a large range in terms of what an indie really is, but still you see that a lot. We have this idea, this vision of a game, something we're passionate about, the creative aspect, and then that's the sole driving force. And while, a lot of us probably look at it as we want to make some type of, let's say, commercial success, and even if it's not that, like, however success is defined and however small that may be, hey, it couldn't hurt and it'd be awesome if I could get something out of this, right? But then, like you said, a lot of times, and from what you're seeing and stuff, is you have those two groups, and the majority is they're just leading with the game, and they're not necessarily looking at it from that business perspective. And there could be a lot of reasons for that too, and it's okay, but it's just really interesting when we're calling out, like I said, who doesn't want a better game? And you're saying that it's not so a game company, and it's not so much that they don't want that. It's just in terms of where that vision, where that focus lies, it's inadvertently not aligned with that concept of building a better game company.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's very, very explainable in a way. Usually the people that start a game company are the people with creative drive, with creative vision, not necessarily the people that are best at integrating various aspects of what a company needs and giving that the right attention. So from my perspective, usually, the game comes first in all aspects. So you start with the game, then if you start professionalizing, usually you professionalize the processes around the game first. You get better at developing, then you look at how do we professionalize the production side of it. And then only at the very end is like, okay, so now that everything is running, maybe we'll look at how we actually run the company. Whereas how the company is run is actually the foundation for how everything else works. Yeah,
exactly. And again, it's like, and I think that goes back to kind of, teasing, I guess, or not necessarily teasing, but in a way, that aspect of things kind of lead into where some of these struggles may arise. Because it's like, you're so much further down this path. And then you're like, oh, now I maybe should take this a little bit more seriously. And then you're like, oh, wait, maybe I should have done things differently 5 years ago or however amount of time. And now I see problems and all these other things that kind of may arise. And, I think it's a good thing to think of more. And I want to kind of talk about this more because it does relate to things such as like, vision and focus. So in this area of things, I'm sure that just, most developers understand the importance of having a vision. Like you said, especially when it's with a game, it's really looking at the vision, refining it, building up processes. And yes, this might be more an objective face way of looking at it, but still it's defining that vision and whatnot. But, for a lot of people though, even this vision, this simple concept in a way, it can entail a lot when we're talking about every and different aspects of things.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
With that being the case, what are some practical approaches for maintaining focus, let's say with cascading goals and objectives?
Yeah. No, that's super important. So and you're touching on like the core of what I do. So the way I usually explain it is I help people establish focus, alignment, and accountability. And basically every structure, every process in a company is there to help you do those three things. And so to start with focus is, I usually ask people to imagine where they want to be in 10 years first, just to figure out like what is the largest, most ambitious version of what you're trying to do here. And it forces them to think big picture, forces them to leave aside some of the more practical limitations that they have right now, and just to put a dot on the horizon. And it's important to do this as a team so that the whole team can actually commit to and agree that whatever dot is on the horizon, actually the one that they're all enthusiastic about and want to work towards. So that's the sort of the longest sideline. Then I usually ask them to come up with a 3-year snapshot. So, okay, if that's where you want to be in 10 years, what does that mean for the company for the next 3 years? Where do you need to be? And I invite them to come up with a little bit more detail. So what does the company look like? How many people are there working? Are you still working in the same office, or are you in multiple cities, multiple countries? Are you still making the same kind of games, or has your scope for your kind of games also increased? So just what is the big picture, or sort of the general picture for where you want to be in 3 years? After we've got a picture for that stadium, we bring it back down to this year. So just the next calendar year usually. So what needs to happen? What are the big chunks of work that need to happen this year in order to be on track with everything that you want to accomplish, everything that you want to do, everything that you want for each other to really do the best work that you're capable of. That usually comes down to, I would say, between 5 and 7 goals. Anything more than that, and you're really kidding yourself. Usually, especially if it's a small team, there's just not an infinite amount of things you can do. And in order to be really honest with yourself, you got to be ruthless about how many goals are we setting that we can realistically chase, realistically finish, while still having the quality that we want to stand for. And if you do anything less than like 3 to 4, you're probably not being ambitious enough. So somewhere in that ballpark. And then from there, with most companies I work with, we break that down into quarters. So, okay, if that's where you want to be at the end of the year, where do you want to be at the end of this quarter? What are the chunks of that work, of the big picture stuff that you need to start actually right now, and that you need to finish by that time? So that's just the goal setting. So you have the focus, you're aligned, hopefully, by the end of this exercise on what are we going to do, what's everyone's role, what's everyone's part, and how does that all add up to the bigger picture. And then there's the accountability. And so what I tell my clients is they have to track progress on these quarterly goals every week. You don't have to discuss them in detail, but just, are you on progress? Are these these goals being, is the velocity what it should be? Are we making progress? And the same at the end of every quarter, you round up, you review, and you plan for the next quarter with the yearly goals in mind. So there's all these feedback loops that feedback back into each other, so that you actually are working towards what you said you were going to do, as opposed to what happens at most companies, which is just day-to-day business, and you pick up whatever seems to be most top of mind or most urgent. And then by the end of the year, you either have or you haven't reached your goals, but it's anyone's guess.
I really love how you broke those things down, outlined them, because I feel like these are a lot of exercises that we either aren't aware of, may ignore, any number of reasons why we may not do these things. We're too busy. But the reality of is that whole process can start really making everything simple and simplified.
Yes.
And it can really address those things. It's like, hey, we know we have all these different directions, goals, objectives that we need to do. But like you called out, after a while, like if you have more than 7, you just start running into that problem again of getting overwhelmed and everything else. Whereas if you have too few, it's getting that balance, right? I'd like to maybe call it like ambitious balance. And
that's a good way of putting it.
Striking that balance there, because if you set yourself up, too small, they're like, but you're not moving the needle. You're not, making any real progress there. And at the end there, I that whole process that you mentioned about, reviewing, like tracking and reviewing and those steps, I think it's great, because I know that, like, especially without those things in place, anyone leading a small team or studio, they're let's face it, almost every task comes off as being important, but not every task will move the needle, right? So
exactly, yeah.
You explained how some of this could work, but I want to dive in a little bit more. Like, what are some ways that can help people really focus on the impactful work that gets a studio closer to their goal, as opposed to focus on, let's say, the busy but also important work?
Yeah. Yeah, so that's where the accountability comes in, mostly. So the first thing is to just be ruthless about what are we actually committing to, right? So the way I set goals with my clients is it's not like an exercise in how ambitious can we be, like what can we come up with that looks nice on a piece of paper. No, it's like, what can you actually commit to? What will you have done by the end of this quarter? And that forces people to really think, okay, so I wanted to do 10 things and I said they were all important, but if I'm really honest, 6 of them are more important than the other ones. And then I challenge them, okay, so that means that I want you to really just put aside for now, but put aside those 4 other things. You do not get to work on them this quarter because you are committing to those other 6 that are more important. That's the first one. So being really honest with yourself and with the team of what can we do? And what are we committing to? It's a commitment, not hopes and dreams that maybe come true at the end of this ride. And so the second part is accountability. So if you're talking with your team every week, then the whole team has a chance to say, okay, you committed to these things. Maybe one person had 2 of the 6 goals. You committed to doing these 2 things. What's the progress? How far have you come along? Are you running into any issues? Are you on track to actually finishing the work by the end of the quarter? And even if one person is inclined to sort of drift off and start working on things that don't move the needle, by meeting weekly and discussing the progress weekly, everyone has a chance to say, no, we need you back on track. Like, we all committed to these big goals. We need you on track. Like, this is a team effort. Let's get realigned and get refocused.
I really like that because, again, that whole process of accountability is going to just aid in that whole, alignment aspect, because without the accountability, it's like you said, everybody starts like kind of drifting off. When that drift happens, that's when, like the scenario we mentioned earlier was, oh, I maybe should have made these changes 10 years ago or 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Because it's like now everybody is adrift, though we're all here. And man, I just think like what kind of it must really like mess with your mind in a way where you think like, you look back like we were always busy, we're always doing stuff, we're further along, but now it feels like we aren't. I mean, talk about when people have burnout and things like that. I'm sure that's one of probably many other scenarios that kind of like end up happening and where burnout can essentially originate from. And I think mainstream doesn't necessarily talk about it that much, but that's really what it is. It's like my tires are always spinning and I know I'm further along than where I was when I started, but why don't I feel where I'm at the point where I should be? Or there's others that start at the same time where they're about the same, but when I look at them, I see them, I perceive them as being, and I'm not talking about trying to compare and despair here, folks, but still that still happens. We still go through that process.
Yeah. And I think it's also important to highlight that it's probably like that drift that you mentioned is the natural state. Like I would almost call it like business entropy. All systems tend to gravitate towards more chaos. And that just happens. I mean, I know it myself. Like, I'm not the most productive person in the world by a long stretch. I fall into these same traps, but I have set up some systems for myself and some reminders that help me get back on track. So, from the perspective of running a business, what you want to make sure you do is you structure and you limit that chaos that will always arise as much as possible.
That's a really good point and is a really nice segue into another area I want to talk about, which is, being adaptive, right? Because what you just said is like, hey, there's going to be traps. I fall into them myself, but I have ways to help me get out of those traps. So in those moments, and just for people listening today, what would you say are some proactive strategies that studio leaders can, and even just small indie teams can use to anticipate some of these traps or other potential problems or challenges that may arise when they're making this game?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So it's hard to give a very concrete answer to that because different studios have different contexts, so they will run into different potential problems. But I think in general, like what happens when you get surprised by something is you assume things that didn't turn out to be true. And so one thing you can always do is when you're moving a certain direction, when you're making a certain decision, is to ask, so what assumptions are we making within this decision or within choosing this path? And the more you can articulate those assumptions, the more you can also look at, okay, so what if these assumptions change? So let's say you're signing with a publisher. And your assumption is, okay, in the contract, it says that the publisher takes care of the marketing. That's an assumption. What happens? I mean, there's plenty of stories in the industry of publishers taking on the accountability or the responsibility for marketing, but not actually delivering to the satisfaction of of the games they signed, of the companies they signed. So when you make that decision to sign, it's good to know, okay, we're making the assumption that they will take care of it, but what if that doesn't happen? Like, what can we do in that moment? Or even better, what can we do right now to prepare for a situation where they don't deliver to our expectations and we have to pitch in and we have to do everything we can to right the ship? And so in that way, if you are very rigorous about that in checking your assumptions and then going through the exercise of, okay, so what happens if that assumption turns out to be false? You can actually preempt a lot of potential pitfalls and challenges because you're prepared. You've thought them through, at the very least, in big picture style, like, this goes wrong, but we'll figure that out, or this goes wrong, but we can do A, B, or C. And then you're really well prepared.
I really love that you called that out, especially with that example of, getting publisher support. It's always, I know this is a big one for a lot of people out there, is getting that support. And it's funny because in the years that I've been doing this now, everything from, let's just say, even my own lead development prospecting, one of the biggest things that people are looking for is, what do they say? A lot of times is from what they're looking for publishers is funding and marketing support. I would say that's probably the most generalized ask people are looking for when it comes to seeking partnerships with publishers. But the funny thing is, and as you called out to just a moment ago, is what is marketing? What are you assuming entails marketing? And I've had this with some people that I've worked with too, where they had the assumption that this was going to happen and it didn't for a variety of different reasons. But now, because of that assumption, now they are left in a position where, well, I don't know what to do because I didn't plan for this. I assumed everything was going to be okay. It's not.
Yeah.
And now we're running into these difficulties. And it's always unfortunate when I hear these things happening and when I see them because, and I'm sure you can relate to some degree in your own way, Martijn, is because now these people are really stuck. They're really struggling, and there's only so much for other people, whether it's someone like myself or you, or even anyone out there, whether it's an agency can do, because these things weren't prepared for. There was no real anticipation of, hey, it was
exactly.
What do we do in this case? And if there's no plan for that, then it just goes back into that cycle. I think we were talking a little bit before where essentially it's almost like now you start drifting again. Even if you have your systems and plans in place, you start to drift again because of different reasons.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
So, I know like this is really cool. And I'm curious too, because I think with one of the examples we just provided and we talked about, essentially we could view this as a setback. And, when this happens, it can definitely cause some misalignment, let's say with the original vision, with those goals. Oh, we made this assumption, this happened. Now what? Everything's off, right? So when those things happen, when those situations arise, in what ways can leaders, let's say, pivot essentially to realign with their vision, even if their goals, may change because of these factors, whether they're in control, they were in control of them or not?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So the way I look at it is every strategy in the end is flexible, right? Ideally, you don't want to revisit your 10-year goal every 6 months, but it's absolutely possible to pivot if something comes up. So I think the first thing to question when things start to change is, so what is changing? Is this something that is only important for us in the short term? Is this the midterm, or does this change things for us in the long term? And as long as you know that, then you can actually make a very conscious decision on, okay, so do we just change how we get to our 10-year goal? Or are we like in agreement that things have changed so much and we want to go in such a different direction that we need to change our 10-year goal? Are we moving in a completely different direction? And one way to actually build that into your process is what I do with my clients is, first of all, they have the ability to update, for example, their quarterly rocks at any point. If it turns out that, actually reality has changed, we were making, planning to make a game for Apple, but now that all the regulations have changed, we'll just scratch that and we'll come up with something new. That's fine. The other way, more focused on the long term, is every quarter, in their quarterly review, I recommend that they go through at the very least, their yearly plan. So is this still what we want to do? Are we still on track? But also, is this still what we're aiming for? If not, that's a great position, like in between quarters, in between big chunks of work, to figure out if so, how the yearly goals should change. And every year at the yearly review, I invite them to go through everything they figured out, everything they know to be true for their company, and just go through it with a knife, just to see, like, what does everything still stand up? Is this still what we believe in? Is this still what we're enthusiastic about? Or should we change things? And then again, in between years, that is the perfect spot to really sit back, maybe do an offsite and talk about where do we want to go? What are our ambitions?
These things are also great because what you just outlined too, in a way, is, there's some things that kind of led us into that question and conversation, was like, the unexpected, or whether, we could control them or not, it still was unexpected. And in what you're talking about here, that goes back to the initial process that you outlined, like with the tracking and that review. It's almost like a form of redundancy to help ensure that, things are still on the same track. So whether you're accounted for that assumption or not, or we're planning to be adaptable or flexible in those cases, that process still brings you back to where you need to be. And the other thing that I think is cool, which is what isn't necessarily as objective, I guess it's a little bit more subjective, but it allows you to approach it in a objective matter, is the whole drive aspect. Like you said, if you start going through those reviews, that process again, and being like, hey, look, we're falling short of some of these goals, whatever the metrics and other things you might be monitoring. And then you're like you said, go through with a knife. And then you might get to the bottom of it, where like, what do we really feel now? What's our passion now? What's our drive? Is it because we're still making the same simulation games and no one wants to do that for the next 10 years anymore? Or the thought of it is just bringing the whole team down? Or is it something else? And I love that too, because even with something so focused and everything, this whole process also allows you to view things that are a little bit more, let's say, emotionally driven. And that's just as important to call out as if, you're doing all these busy things and realizing that only, 3 out of the 7 are effective into helping you achieve your goals. So I just love this thing, because it's like, it's multifaceted, right? It has it's a simple process that can address so many different things in someone's business.
Yeah, definitely. And, now that you're highlighting that, so that's also something this is very specifically why my tagline or my goal is, I want to help people build better companies, not more successful companies, not companies that make more money. I want to help people build better companies, and whatever better is up to them. I want to help them thrive. I want to help them build the company that they want to have. And that part, that drive, that ambition, or whatever feels right for them, that should have a very explicit place in every process throughout the company, instead of just, taking, I don't know, some kind of scaling template and say, okay, look, if you're here now, you take these steps, then you're going to end up like 10 times wherever you like. Not everyone wants that. Some people just want to make small games sustainably, and that's fine too. You can still make improvements on how you run the company a little bit more effectively, a little bit more efficiently, and have the best version of that specific company.
Yeah, and I like that approach and outlook too, because you're right. Not everybody wants to be this big entity. Not everybody, wants X, Y, or Z thing that we may anticipate or assume what success looks like, right? It just allows you then to be like, what is, again, from you personally to down to your team, and what your company values are and all those other aspects, what is going to mean improvement? What is going to mean better for the long run? What ultimately is that drive? And that's, I think that, this is coming from me a little bit more personally, but I think that's going to be way more rewarding than just simply looking at dollar signs or other things that may be associated in those greater ideas of success and in quotations.
Yeah, no, I think so.
Well, this was also very insightful and honestly, very actionable and simple. These processes that you just outlined, I feel like are anything that any one of us listening today could probably start a little bit, but I'm sure some guidance is always going to be welcomed and things like that. So in light of that, as we're approaching our time here, what are some, let's say, tips or suggestions, advice that you would want to highlight? Just a few would be great for our listeners today based on what we discussed today.
Yeah. So I think, first of all, like my big talking point is, you're a game company, so the game matters, but I would encourage you, beg you even, to pay at least as much attention to the company, because it is eventually, in the long run, it's more important than whatever game you happen to be working on right now. So it deserves as much attention and resources and love as the game, if you want to be making games sustainably in the long run. So that spend time working on your company as opposed to just in your company. Second, I think we touched on this very, very briefly with the publisher example, but I think something that a lot of companies tend to forget, especially indie companies, maybe, is if you make a very, very reductive version of the world, a game company needs to do two things. You have to build a product and you have to distribute it to people that actually want to play it. The distribution side is everything that entails getting it into the hands. So it entails marketing, it entails publisher relations. Try and figure out how to pay more attention to the distribution side, so you don't get blindsided and build a game that no one can actually play. And third would be just talk to others. You're not alone. Everyone has been in this position. You don't have to figure everything out yourself. People have done this before you. They've figured out solutions. The games industry tends to be a very friendly environment most of the time. So it's definitely possible to just talk to some people, ask some questions, and get some really, really good insights on whatever problem you may be facing, and that will just get you a little bit further along than you were if you tried to figure everything out yourself.
Absolutely love it. Such great tips and advice there. And, folks, these are all important things to consider. And they're not just exclusive to this industry or to what you're doing. They carry over as well, but they're just still super important and still very applicable to the work that you guys are involved with and doing, especially if it's has anything remotely close to building a company or making a commercial product. They all relate. So I can't thank you enough, Martijn, for sharing that with us. Now, before we depart, what are some links? Where can people connect with you? And first, I know you have something that's super valuable. Please, what's something that you can share with our listeners today that they could get some more awesome insight from you, way beyond what we discussed today? I hope you're catching my very vague thing. Shout out here to what I want you to tell people. Okay, good.
Yeah. Thanks for the reminder. Because I plan to mention that with the first tip I gave there at the end. No, so I've developed mini management frameworks, especially for indies, called Firm, and it has all of the absolute basics that you need in order to really run your company as a company. And get more out of it and make sure that you're focused on the long term and doing the right things to really give your game the environment that it needs to thrive in. And you can find that on my website. It's available for free. Anyone can use it. In fact, right now, I'm even still offering free calls if people have questions about it, because I'm refining some final details. So that should really help people to get started on this if they want to.
Okay, great. And this is essentially like a template, right? That kind of goes through that framework. Yes. And some of the things that you talked about earlier. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a template with step-by-step instructions that you can fully self-implement. Yeah.
Awesome. I love that stuff. I'm sure most of you listening love it too. And okay, and here's the other thing I would like you to call out to. You have a newsletter, correct?
I do, yes. Also on my website.
All right. Yeah. Guys, sign up for it. I've signed up for it, and I'm just very glad that I did. We'll just say that. So highly recommend you guys to do the same as well. And so I think you said it once, but hey, let's hear it one more time. Your website, and also, what are some great ways people can connect with you?
Yeah, so my website is just my name, which is Dutch, but it's martijnvanzwieten.com. But I'm sure you'll provide a link yes. in the show notes. and the easiest place to connect is on LinkedIn.
Okay, great. So check out the website first, and that way you could just copy paste the name, or I don't remember if you have the links on there to your LinkedIn, and then you can connect with Martijn that way. Again, thank you so much. This is such valuable information. I don't think we talk about it enough. So it was just really a pleasure to have you on the show to dive in more on this really important subject of building better game companies.
Thanks, Andrew.
Hey, everyone. Thank you for listening to another episode of Indie Game Movement. I'm Andrew Pappas, your host, and the show's producer is Mustafa Price. Show notes for this episode can be found by visiting rengenmarketing.com, the number episode of the show. Rengen Marketing is a consulting marketing company that helps indie devs with their marketing efforts. Whether you need guidance with your game's marketing strategy or could use a free marketing plan template, then please visit www.rengenmarketing.com and take action. A special thanks to Dakota Saw for Season 2's opening theme and Melissa Gellis for the new logo design. And as always, thanks for being such great listeners, and we'll see you next time on Indie Game Movement.